We are again grateful for everyone who has chosen to remain here with us for the afternoon. I know a lot of people had to get back to work, but we are recording all of these sessions and are very excited to be able to kind of break them down and share them through the magic of social media, as well as getting them to a lot of the legislators who had told us that they wanted to be here today, but I know they scheduled the Senate retreat on top of us in Charleston, and then freshman orientation for the new House legislators is also happening in Columbia today. So we'll make sure that they all get this great information. I tell you what, if you could bottle some of that energy that Steve Moore has, we could change South Carolina tomorrow. I tell you what, I'm ready to go after all of that. But now we're going to introduce a topic that is really very near and dear to my heart, and something that has really been our key issue here since we launched the policy forum almost 2 years ago now in February, and that's the issue of education. When you look around and see the results or the lack of results that we have for the money that we spend in South Carolina, especially among some of our most disadvantaged populations, you have to ask the question, why? And then the second follow-up question to that is, what are we going to do about it? And so that's why I'm so excited to have someone like Kevin Chavous, who is a leader in the national education choice movement. He has traveled the country, seen firsthand what's working, what isn't working. He actually was a leader in Washington, D.C. in implementing some of the choice programs that they enacted there. Obviously one of the neediest and most desperately in need of reform education systems in this country. So he has a lot of hands-on experience about what it takes to really introduce choice and parental options into the system. Before I have him speak, I wanted to let you all know that today we are officially announcing the release of our new and updated Empower Opportunity Education Choice Catalog. This is something that we're really excited about here at the Forum, because what this does is it takes what might be considered dry policy to people outside of this room and translates it into something that is a resource that real people can use. What we've done in this catalog is tell the stories of different families in South Carolina who are accessing all of the different options that are available to them currently, whether it be charter school, homeschool, our new tax credit scholarship for special needs, even high-performing public schools in this state. We tell the story of the family, and then we also tell parents how they can find out more information about whether or not that option is right for their child. So we really are excited about this resource. We think this is something that is going to allow us to grow a parent power network in this state of parents who are interested and engaged and passionate about expanding the choices that we offer to people here in South Carolina. So with that, Kevin, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Because I know you all have had lunch and you've had Steve Moore, and he's probably wiggled a lot out of you, but this to me is the most important issue facing our country. I'm going to speak for a few minutes here just to set the table and give some perspective about where things are educationally in this country across the national spectrum. And then we're going to zero in on South Carolina. We've got a distinguished group of panelists who you'll hear from, and then we'll probe them with some questions, and maybe if we have time, take some questions from you. First thing I want to do is to thank Ellen Weaver and the folks from her organization. Just give her a hand for a terrific conference. Thank you, Ellen, there you are. And I also want to welcome myself back home. I mean, I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, but my father was born and raised in Aiken, South Carolina. And we still own a couple hundred acres in Aiken. And my passion around education unwittingly came from my father. He was the first in his family to go to college at the age of 15. He attended South Carolina State and had a chemistry degree and ended up becoming a pharmacist. And I worked in our corner drugstore growing up, my first job in Indianapolis. So my father is, his older relatives used to say, was smart as a whip. And he began his educational process walking to a one-room schoolhouse outside of the family farm in Aiken, 7 miles uphill each way. Y'all know the story. In fact, several years ago, rest his soul, when me and my 3 siblings were in college, we were really tired of hearing about his uphill walks to and from school at 9 years old. So we knew where the family farm was, and we knew where the one-room schoolhouse was. We put him in the back seat, and we drove, and we put the odometer on 0 just to figure out if it was 7 miles. And it was 7.1 miles. And you see, that's y'all's problem. Y'all don't listen. I told y'all it was over 7 miles. And we said we should have left him at home. But from him, I really understood and appreciate the value of learning. He used to say all the time, boy, if it wasn't for education, I don't know what my future would have held for me. But for that opportunity to maximize on his ability to learn. And, you know, his passion for learning grew out of the success that this country had last century in terms of people understanding that if they applied themselves, if they worked hard, if they pulled themselves up by their bootstrap, if they trusted in education, then they would find success. Well, frankly, my friends, those days are gone. I want to talk about not just where we've been, but where we are and where we need to be. And where we've been, we understand, was a great place in terms of the educational outputs this country had to offer its citizens. Where we are now is not quite the same. You know, Jeb Bush is fond of saying that even though state graduation statistics vary, and say anywhere from 70% to 80% high school graduation rates, the real meaningful statistic is that only half, barely half, of the people who graduate from high school in this country are college or career ready. One of the deep, dark, dirty secrets is that beyond just the challenges we have in our achievement gap, the proficiency ratings between kids of color and their white counterparts, where we know there's been a historic achievement gap for many years that has been flatlined, it hasn't gotten any better in spite of millions and billions of dollars being poured in that. The deep, dark, dirty secret is our good schools aren't quite as good as they used to be. Indeed, if you talk to any college president or anyone who's been affiliated with in the higher education space, and some of you may either be on some of the boards or know this to be the case, one of the biggest budget items is the remedial line for freshmen, because so many of these kids are coming to school not ready, not proficient in reading or math. Condoleezza Rice talks about the fact that 75% of our applicants to the military are rejected because they can't pass the test or they're obese. 75%. So when you talk about the challenges in our educational system, it extends beyond just the economic impact. It now, as she says, speaks to the challenges in maintaining our national security. Indeed, every 26 seconds, a child drops out of school in America. That's 7,000 Americans each day who drop out of school. That's 1.2 million kids each year. So when we talk about where we are, let's understand why we are where we are. See, the challenges lie in the fact that we have had an over-allegiance to a one-size-fits-all approach to educating our young. My father walked to that one-room schoolhouse, and that was the norm for most of the early part of the 20th century and the late part of the 19th century. And then after Horace Mann championed this idea of Boston of compulsory education, we ended up having school districts that took custody of those individual schools that may have had a handful of kids, then morphed into bigger schools. And then they structured and segmented children according to age and grade. So ninth graders would take the same as all ninth graders, and seventh graders would take the same as all seventh graders. I bet most of you, if you were in ninth grade, you took algebra, like me, and guess what? Your mama, your grandmama, and most likely your great-grandmama took it at the same time. But now in this new technological age, that one-size-fits-all approach, which included having the school year have summers off so kids could work in the farm because it was put in place during the agricultural model, and 9 to 3 school day was based on that same agricultural model so the kids could get out of school in time for there to be some light so they could still work in the farm. Well, that one-size-fits-all agricultural model of when we go to school, how we go to school, what we learn, and when we learn it has been outdated in today's technological age. It hasn't kept pace. So we now have many of our school districts who are used to doing things the same time, the same way, the same approach, struggling with the reality of today's children that are really held hostage more to smartphone and get most of their learning through that than they do oftentimes through a stand and deliver lecture format. 30 years ago, we were warned. When A Nation at Risk came out back 31 years ago, they said these words in the preface: if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose the mediocre educational performance that exists today in American schools, we might well have viewed it an act of war. Because they foresaw the challenges with this one approach that was unyielding and resistant to any different. Let's think about it. If you have a child now who is smart or a little bit gifted in math, what's wrong with that child taking algebra in the 7th grade as opposed to the 9th grade? Now try to get that done in your local school. Or what if your child has some challenges and maybe they should take algebra in the 11th grade? The malleability needed to adjust in today's society with today's various learning modalities that respond and react to today's children is far different than the days when my father walked to that one-room schoolhouse in Aiken, South Carolina. 30 years ago, when the Nation at Risk panel made their recommendations, they made 38 recommendations as to how we fix things, how we become competitive, because their great fear was this was a challenge for the country's livelihood. Their great fear was that other countries were beginning to approach it differently. Their great fear was that other countries understood that one size doesn't fit all, and they were creating approaches to educational attainment that were different, even 30 years ago. And the proof is in the pudding. Early this year, the PISA data, and PISA is an international study that measures the outputs and the comparisons of the educational attainment for children from industrialized nations around the world. The PISA data shows that there are 17 countries higher than the United States in reading, 21 countries higher than the United States in science, and 26 higher in math. 30, 40 years ago, we were always in the top 2 or 3. Now we're struggling to maintain standing in the 20s in these core educational discipline areas. When A Nation at Risk came up with those 38 recommendations, they recommended things like a longer school day. We should explode that 9-to-3 model, a longer school year. Some districts should consider year-round schools. And then when it came to the issue of teachers and certification, they said we should look at performance pay. We should get rid of this idea of tenure for life, or let's professionalize our teaching corps. Last year, I had a debate at Stanford University with Randy Weingarten, head of the Teachers Union, and she said, Kevin, you know, this choice thing doesn't work. We need to respect teachers. I said, no, we all need to respect teachers. Why don't you follow, Randy, what A Nation at Risk recommended? Well, if you professionalize your teaching corps, similar to what doctors and lawyers and accountants do, you can then enact some self-policing, some continuing education. So it won't be us saying you should get rid of so-and-so teacher because they're bad. You have your own internal mechanism to demand higher pay and recognize that you can self-police your profession, because every teacher knows who's good and who's bad, and every teacher who inherits bad teachers hates when they get those kids from Miss Jones's class who had them the year before. Every teacher knows that. So why not professionalize the teaching corps? That was recommended 30 years ago. 30 years later, virtually none of the recommendations that were handed down by that esteemed presidential commission have been adopted. Virtually none. 5 years ago, on the 25th anniversary, Great American Schools, a bipartisan group that analyzed the recommendations of A Nation at Risk and what has happened since then, they said the number one reason why these recommendations have not been adopted, either in the states or around the country, is the politics of education. The politics of education. Now, I know you South Carolinians understand what politics is in education. There's virtually no other area that has been politicized as much as education. But I'm here to tell you that one thing you need to start recognizing is the politics of education extends beyond a campaigned ad that says, I want more money for teachers, invest in schools. Those platitudes just don't get it. We need to start looking deeper, peeling back that onion, understanding what it means to depoliticize education and truly put kids first. I'll talk about that, and Ellen, don't worry, I know I only have 25 minutes, so I'm not going to go too far. But I do want to talk about some solutions. People ask me all the time, well Kevin, you pound the table pretty well about what's bad. How do we fix K through 12 education? Well, I say we need a short-term and a long-term strategy. We must understand the need to fly that plane while we fix it. And for someone who travels a lot, I can use that expression. To fly it, we must immediately give relief to kids that we know are going to wake up tomorrow and go to a bad school. I think it's unconscionable that in this great country, we know that there are children that are going to wake up and be miseducated. We know that every 26 seconds a child's going to drop out. We know that. And we view it as tolerable. We know that half the kids of color are going to drop out. And we also know that it is affecting the lifeblood of our country. Last month I was asked to speak before a group of Texas businessmen, and I was introduced by the owner of the San Antonio Spurs. Got him to drink enough wine, almost got me a championship ring, but that didn't work. I was trying. But the reason why they asked me, they said, look, in Texas, we do things big. I said, okay, once we got rid of the preamble about how big they do things in Texas, I said, they said, look, we have invested so much in our local school districts. We've sort of run away a little bit from charters and choice because we said, let's fix these schools, let's fix these individual schools. But the reality, and they gave me a factoid which I wasn't aware of about Texas, 64% of the K through 12 student body in Texas is now minority, Hispanic or African American, 64%. And 80% of those students are not proficient. So these Texas businessmen said to me, we're facing the ultimate jaws that's going to bite us. That our economy is going to fall apart because most of us have to outsource to India or Asia, and we can't have an economy where over half our kids are not proficient and haven't mastered the basics in terms of being college or career ready by the time they get out of high school. So we have to look at alternatives. So this idea of flying the plane while we fix it, we know that part of the long-term strategy is the accountability, a quality teacher in each classroom. Let's fight over performance pay. Let's figure out, I hate to say it, Common Core, which I think is a distraction for this subject. But let's talk about early childhood education. All those long-term things, they take years. We've been fighting over standards for the last 30 years and we're still losing kids. And let's keep in mind, even for those of you who come from an educational K through 12 educational district, and I defy you to prove me otherwise, no school district has ever reformed itself from within. They never have, and they never will. The only way they will reform is through external pressure. There's no reason to reform if you're the only game in town. And the best form of external pressure we have found is through educational choice. That's why I'm a full-fledged believer in having a maximum number of options available for families and kids in need. We can't wait. When Dr. Martin Luther King talked about the fierce urgency of now, he didn't talk about the fierce urgency of tomorrow or yesterday. He said now. He didn't say we want our rights later. He said today. And the same for those kids we know are going to wake up and go to bad schools. They shouldn't have to wait on us to be put in an educational environment that works for them. That's the essence of parent choice. When I was on the DC Council and chair of the Education Committee back in the late 90s, I was one of the first Democrats to support charter schools, and I have the scars on them. In fact, I used to wear a turtleneck, but that's okay. You should have seen the scars when I came out for vouchers. Me and the mayor walking hand in hand with Secretary Rod Page and President Bush saying this is what we need to do for our kids. But the proof is in the pudding, because DC Public Schools is a textbook example as to why choice can help invigorate change in the traditional school district. And let me give you a couple examples and I'll sit down. So in DC, our Opportunity Scholarship Program, our federal voucher program, now has a graduation rate of 92%. Those nearly 2,000 kids, 10,000 kids have gone through the program, and of those 10,000 kids, 92% graduation rate, 90% of those kids are going to college. That's 35 points higher than DC Public Schools. And those kids came from schools where over 80% of the kids were failing. So we took kids from schools where we knew 8 out of 10 were going to fail, and 9 out of 10 of them are now not only graduating, but going to college. Our DC charter program is continuing to blow it away, where we have our schools ranked in Tier 1, and one of the things I know you want to think about is ranking your schools. There should be some public display of the quality that's coming out of each and every school. Jeb Bush started this first with the A through F rating. I don't know how you do it in DC with the charter schools. They have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and the Tier 1 schools have increased each year. And the kids in the charter school movement are doing amazing things. DC has had so much success now that almost half the public school kids in DC go to charter schools. So guess what the DC chancellor did earlier this summer? They're starting to see improvement too, markedly, beginning with Michelle Rhee and then with Okaya Henderson. Their test scores are getting better, but they're still seeing that parents now have options. They want that charter school that has a Chinese immersion class, or they want that math and science charter school, or they want that private school where the president's kids go. They're in our program. So we have all these options. So now all of a sudden, the chancellor from DC hired Obama campaign workers to train principals to knock on doors saying, we can educate your kids too. Think about it. When was the last time your local principal knocked on the door of your neighbors saying, our school is for your kids too? Don't just think about that charter school. The competition has made a difference in DC. But not only DC, in Indiana, where I was born and raised, we have 30,000 kids in that voucher program, along with a robust charter program. These parents now have options. And when I was home not long ago in Indiana, I saw a sign where Indianapolis Public Schools, which is one of the worst performing school districts in the country, several years ago, Indianapolis Public Schools had 80% of their boys dropping out, 80%. Well, after the charter school program in Indiana and the voucher program that now has 30,000 kids, they're running advertisements in Indianapolis Public Schools. We can educate your kids too. Because at some point, they're starting to realize, yeah, we can complain about them being there. We can sue because they're there. We may not like them. But if there's a product that parents are going to, sooner or later, we need to do what they're doing. We need to give a product that makes sense. The same thing's happened in Arizona. We're seeing in Louisiana. We're seeing in Florida, Milwaukee, all over the country. Now these school districts where they have had robust choice programs in place are understanding that they have to compete for those kids, and there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, we need to think out of the box. When the Wall Street Journal interviewed me recently, they asked me about the opponents of educational choice. I said, well, the reality is the only people who are against educational choice are the people who have educational choice for their kids. They're the only ones fighting it. For those mothers and those fathers and those kids who have to face the reality of their school that's non-performing, they're the ones that we're fighting for. Last point. Leadership must lead. We must have the courage to do what's right for kids and take the politics out. There's no Republican or Democratic way to teach a kid how to read or write. But we have allowed the politics of the day to infect our approach to education policy. 2 quick stories. When I was in Alaska in the winter last year, and I want extra credit for going to Alaska in the winter last year, where the average high was 25 below, and I was talking to a Republican in the legislature in Juneau who was promoting an educational choice bill statewide. A Democrat came by who said he might support the bill, so the 3 of us were talking, then 4 or 5 other Republicans walked by, and then everybody left, and it was me and the original Republican sponsor of the bill. He said, boy, I'm gonna get in trouble with my caucus because they saw me standing in the hall talking with Democrats. I said, wow, just talking with Democrats. That's almost as bad as when I met with the South Carolina Black Caucus several years ago about an expanded charter school bill. And it was a private meeting, me and members of the Black Caucus. And after a while, you know, I was giving them examples of what was going on in D.C. and Louisiana and other places. And they said, look, you know what, that may work in D.C. And you know what, and even if it helped our kids, I can't support it because they're supporting it over there on the other side of the aisle. And their fathers and their grandfathers were segregationists, and I can't support it, even if it will help our kids. And I said, wow. See, at some point in time, we need to recognize our charge is to have kid-centered solutions that ask one question: will this help a child or a group of children learn? If the answer is yes, as Americans, we should support it. If the answer is no, we should be against it. And I believe that pure approach makes sense. And I also feel that this is an issue that, irrespective of your political party or your views on other issues of the day, our society, our country's future dictates that we come together on this issue. There's more I will get into. I do want to close now with what I think is a relevant quote, and then we'll hear from our panelists. Years ago, Lyndon Johnson said it best when he said, every child should be encouraged to get as much education as he has the ability to take. We want this not for the child's sake, but for the nation's sake. Nothing matters more to the future of our country. Not military preparedness, for armed might is worthless if we lack the brain power to build a world of peace. Not our productive economy, for we cannot sustain growth without trained manpower. Not even our democratic system of government, because freedom is fragile if the citizens are ignorant. I think this is the most important issue facing our country, and this is an issue, I think, in which the time is right for you all in this great state. South Carolina can move from being regularly in the 40s in terms of the educational attainment of their children. And what's a few points among friends? I don't know if you're 44, 47, or 48. You have been as low as 49. But you can move from that to be a leader by not only understanding the importance of the long-term solutions, but figuring out how to integrate a robust array of quality options for kids in need today, so you can help move the needle forward, not just for them, but for all of us. Thank you all very much. Thank you. So with that in mind, I am going to ask each of our representatives from the panel to come forward and speak for 5 minutes. You can see their bios in the program. You have an esteemed group of people before you, and when they all finish, then we'll have some questions for them, and then we'll take it from there. So first, Mika Chavous, let's give her a hand.